What happens when a man discovers that he is living in a simulation, not in reality? Let's find out in the video. The movie begins by showing a very dense forest in Japan. In the middle of this forest there is a large research lab, and in this lab only a single scientist named George worked. In fact, George is contracted by a very large company in Japan to develop the humanoid robot, that is, some robots that can think and understand like us humans. George did his research in the same lab for many years and developed 2 robots for starting. The first robot was named J1 and the second robot was named J2. The J1 robot is quite large in size, but has none of the human-like fillings or functionality. On the other hand, J2, being a little smaller in size, had the ability to take human-like fillings inside it. But George knows that J2 isn't a real humanoid robot either, because humanoid robots are some such inventions that you will not be able to find out whether it is a human or a robot. George named his most advanced robot ever, J3, which looked like a lady's body. George's work to build the third robot was not over yet, but because of his overwhelming love for AI and technology, George worked long hours. Now George comes to his lab after his morning walk as usual. Then Jade, a robot, tells George that I had a very strange dream. In this dream, you and me are sitting in a car and going for a long drive. But George had clearly explained to J2 that this could not happen at all. Now here George is talking to his wife Jenny after such a long time, but their video call was getting interrupted. Jenny is very upset with George because he is staying away from her because of his experiment. George didn't like it at all either, but he had to do it for the money. Now their video call got cut by itself. After a while, George gets a call from his company's boss named Leah. Leah was telling George that one of our security team is going to come to the lab and check everything. George was a bit shocked because he didn't want a security team to come here, because George not have told his company about J2 and J3 robots. He had given all the information only about J1 and said that this robot has been made so far. That is, George was doing his own experiments by making J2 and J3, and it is completely illegal. Although George didn't include any feelings or humanoid abilities in the J1, but he did include them in the J2 and J3, and if the company people found out that George had done these experiments secretly from them, so he will be fired from the job forever. In fact, George wanted to insert the intelligence and memories of humans into the robots he created, although he did not insert human emotions into the J1 robot, but he has inserted some memories of his wife into the J2 robot, and this is the reason why the J2 robot was having recurring dreams, that George and J2 are going on a long drive, because these memories were of George's wife Jenny, and now George wanted to put his wife's entire consciousness and memories inside J3, so that the J3 robot becomes a complete copy of his wife. Now J2 sees George talking to his boss Leah. Then J2 tells George that you should stay away from Leah. I find her intentions very dangerous. George now began working on his most advanced robot, the J3 robot, and he was preparing it, but J2 is very jealous to see it because George spends most of his time making J3. J2 began to feel that she had become completely useless. That's why George is making J3 now. But George also explained to J2 that there is no such thing. You 3 robots are the best for me. Now the next day George notices that his lab door has opened on itself, and a wild dog has entered the lab. George didn't understand who finally opened the lab door. He knows that only J2 has this permission. J2 might have done it, but after asking her, J2 was saying that she don't know about it at all. Here George got a little idea that J2 was jealous somewhere, because George was spending a lot of time in making J3, even though J2 is a robot. She still has some memories of George's wife Jenny inside her mind. That's why J2 didn't want that George go to someone else. Now the same day are shown Vincent and Melvin, 2 employees of a company called Wicket. Vincent asks George that we have come to see your wife's program. George calls them both inside the house, but he hides J2 and J3 somewhere so no one can know about them. Now Melvin went to check a huge black color machine in George's lab, because those 2 employees were technicians of the same large machine, to which they came to repair this machine. Now Vincent is asking George, what is the problem you are facing in this machine? George says that something must have gone wrong inside this machine. My wife can call me and talk on this machine, but when I call my wife the line doesn't always connect, and now all these lines have become much worse. Vincent gives a reply to George that maybe your wife is going to turn off now. Vincent was asking George if his wife Jenny knew what happened to her. Even George doesn't quite understand what these employees are asking. Here, Melvin was constantly fixing this machine. Then he discovered something very strange. Melvin tells his partner Vincent that whatever memories are inside the machine have been altered on a personal level, and George must have done it. But George was clear that I had done nothing of the sort. Melvin says this stuff is totally illegal, and you have to go to jail too? George was quite frightened by this, but Vincent explains to Melvin and tells him that it due to a technical issue. George has no role in this. Vincent and Melvin left after finishing all the technical work. With the whole situation settled now, George now fully focuses on making J3. He worked on it continuously for several days to make it, after which he succeeded in making J3. Now J3 then opens her eyes for the first time, and she looked quite confused. The surprising thing is that J3's speaking style and behavior was similar to that of George's wife Jenny, because now George has installed all his wife's memories and emotions inside J3. That's why J3 was so advanced. We now see George repairing a security tower outside the lab, but after a while, suddenly the lights of the place where J3 was in the lab start to flicker itself. J3 was very scared of this. That's why she starts calling George loudly. But George was standing on the tower solving its technical issue. Then George's eyes suddenly go to a fighter jet flying in the sky. George could not understand whose jet it is. He immediately informed his boss Leah about all these things. Then Leah tells George the whole truth, that our competitors have taken a lot of interest in your project, and somehow they have come to know about this secret project. That's why those competitors could do anything to get the technology of our project J1. Even your life may be in danger now. George's boss, Leah, sends an assistant named Mr. Tag to protect him. So now George finishes all his work and goes to see Mr. Tag. He was also explaining to George that your project is now under threat from enemies. It means that in the process of achieving your project, you may also lose your life. That's why you have to finish your J1 project as soon as possible and hand it over to the company. For now, Mr. Tag gives George a very advanced briefcase for security, which he said to open only at a difficult time. George has no idea what is inside the briefcase, so he carried it to his lab and fell into a deep sleep. After sleeping for several hours, suddenly the security alarm starts beeping. George got up and started checking around. Then he sees that J3 is not at her position, meaning someone has stolen J3 from here. George is very scared, so he opens the briefcase given by Mr. Tag. The briefcase acted as a security system. It locked all the windows and doors of the laboratory. From inside the brief, Mr. Tag also calls to find out which emergency has arisen. But George then remembered that he couldn't tell anyone about J3, because he made J2 and J3 hidden from the company. So now George changes the conversation and says that I was just testing how it all works. Now, after closing the briefcase, all the windows and doors of the lab open. George now went outside to find J3. Now at the same time we are shown some flashback scene. Here George was sitting in a car with his wife Jenny and going somewhere. Then George was telling Jenny about a concept his company had invented. George says that according to our company's research, if a person dies, we could store all the memories in their subconscious mind inside a memory, and all of them can put into a machine by our company, so that even after death we can talk to these dead people. This concept was so extraordinary that it would change human civilization. George has a lot of interest in this project. Now suddenly George is assigned a project for 3 years in the company he used to work for. In this project, George will have to spend 3 years in Japan inside a lab, where he has to develop some humanoid robots for the company. In fact, it happens to be the same laboratory and contract in Japan that George is doing right now. George had told all these things to his wife Jenny, although Jenny was a little upset because she will have to live away from her husband for 3 years, and she didn't want to do that at all. George and Jenny were talking on the same topic while sitting in the car. Suddenly, George loses control of his car and has a very dangerous accident. The bad thing was that George's wife Jenny had died in this accident. George was very disturbed by this, but now he used the technology and stored all his dead wife's mind and all her memories in a machine of a very famous company called Visa. This is the same machine that was in George's lab. That is, with the help of this advanced machine, George could communicate with his wife's subconscious mind and memories. It is just like a simulation of his wife's mind. George has accepted the 3-year contract after this accident. From then on, he went into the laboratory to create the J1, J2, J3, but there was a very dark secret George was hiding from everyone. In fact, the machine inside which all the memories and consciousness of George's wife were stored. George took out all these things without permission and converted them into digital format and put them into his J2 and J3 projects. That's the reason why J2 and J3 are very advanced, and within them were memories of George's wife, Jenny. In a way, George wanted to bring his wife fully alive inside J3. He did not tell these things to his company at all, which is completely illegal. When there were 2 employees of this company came at George's house. Then an employee named Melvin had already said that some changes have been made inside the machine. These changes were made by George so that he could take out all the memories of his wife and put them inside J3, and perhaps George succeeds in this. Now the story moves to the present time where George is constantly searching for J3, but as soon as he entered a chamber in his laboratory, J3 jumped on him. That is, J3 was not stolen by anyone, but she got out of there by herself. Now J3's systems have just been activated, so she was thinking of George as her enemy. J3 said, "How did you put all the memories of your wife Jenny in my mind without asking me?" George somehow convinces J3 that this is a win-win for both of us, after which George was confirming with J3 that who finally freed you from your system. J3 simply says that I was taken out by J2. J3 said that J2 was also trying to kill me. That's why I was constantly hiding from it. George understood that J2 was totally jealous of J3. That's why she will try her best to destroy J3. George has now completely deactivated J2 for safety and placed it in another chamber. Due to lack of resources, George removed J2's feet, which he fits into J3, and now he has put his full concentration into making J3. George was now slowly installing all the consciousness of his wife into J3, because of which the feelings inside J3, her behavior and way of talking becomes the same as Jenny. After working continuously, within a few days, George had completed the J3. He then feeds all the data into the J3 and puts a synthetic skin on top of it, which makes J3 seem fully human. When J3 was activated, she now looked fully human. From the way she spoke, her behavior was completely like a human. Now here George's project was fully completed, because he has made J3, so now he goes and activates J2 so that it can also meet J3. But when J2 finds out that George has removed both of its legs and put them in J3's body, then J2 became very sad. J2 started to feel that George is leaving her and now going to J3. After all these things, J2 went into depression. J2 now goes to meet J1 for the last time. There is nothing left in J2's life, so it commits suicide by coming to the bank of the river. J2 had fallen under the water, where all its systems go down. But George has no idea about all these things. He was busy developing J3. Now inside J3 there are memories of George's wife Jenny, which allows her to view everything from Jenny's past. Here, J3 finds out that Jenny was pregnant when the accident happened. When she tells this to George, he gets quite emotional. Now George wanted to install all the memories of his wife inside J3, because there was still a small unit of his wife left to be installed into J3's mind. When George tries to get his wife's last unit out of the machine, it keeps getting interrupted, so that he can't get the last memory unit out. George then called the company that made the machine and said that I could not access my wife's last unit. Then the manager of the company checked and told that all the conscious memories of your wife and all feeling are now going to expire completely, which cannot be fixed even if you want to. But George was angry, saying that a few days ago, 2 employees of your company, Vincent and Melvin, came to check this machine, and they said there is nothing wrong with it. So finally, how can all these things be interrupted? But the manager said that there is no employee named Vincent and Melvin in our company, and our employee did not even visit your house. George was completely shocked by this. He now realizes that the 2 employees may have been employees of competitors, who came here to gather information about his project, and they probably all know about J2 and J3. George was very scared, because if this is known to his company, he will be locked in jail forever, so he decides to move away from the place with J3. But before leaving, J3 went to the same machine and started talking to Jenny's subconscious mind and memories. J3 tells Jenny, don't worry about George, I will take care of him perfectly. And now all your subconscious and all your memories are slowly going to expire, after which you will never be able to communicate with George. Now here George wanted to hack the system and extract her last unit before his wife's memories expired. George had now taken out that last unit with the continuous hacking, which he immediately activates the J3's mind insertion process. Within a short time, all the consciousness and all the memories of Jenny has been transferred into J3's body. That is, all of Jenny's memories from her birth to her death are now installed within J3. J3's behavior had also completely changed now. She knew everything about George and Jenny. J3 goes to George and says, we don't need to leave here. But George does not understand anything about this. Then suddenly someone calls from this black machine. But J3 was saying, don't pick up this call because you will know a sad truth, and it might make you feel really bad. When George picked up the call, none other than his wife Jenny was speaking on the other side. And now here a dark secret of the whole story is revealed. Jenny was telling George that I was told by the company that all your husband's consciousness and memories are about to expire. That's why I came to talk to you one last time. Jenny also said that I was pregnant when our accident happened, and after so many years we now have a daughter. Jenny now also gets her daughter to talk to her father George. His daughter was talking to him saying, I love you so much. Mama said we can't meet you because you are far away, but I will always love you. Jenny also now says goodbye to George for the last time and leaves. Now we are shown in reality that Jenny is alive and she is meeting with the same man named Vincent with her daughter. Vincent apologizes to Jenny for not being able to save her husband memories, and now George's consciousness, which is stored in the machine, is also about to expire. Jenny was also a bit sad about this, but she has to move on in her life. Actually, the truth was that when George and Jenny had the accident, in that accident, not Jenny but George has died. After that, Jenny put all her husband George's memories and all of his consciousness into a machine, and from the beginning it was Jenny, not George, who was talking to him, all of which are conscious memories. In fact, the company has to create a simulation in which the consciousness of dead people like George can live inside the machine. All the subconscious memories were given these tasks in a way that they could survive for many years. When the company found out that George sometime previously working on a humanoid robot, then the company called Jenny and asked her permission that they all want to continue all the memories of George's subconscious mind after his death. In all these memories we will show to George that Jenny died in the accident, and he is alive, and then George would have to travel to Japan within the same simulation where he could continue his experiment in building humanoid robots. Now, after much thought, Jenny also agrees to this, and after that, because of the machine's programming, George's subconscious memories seem to think that he is doing all these things in reality. Rather, he was in a simulation whose subconscious is in the machine. George has finally made this humanoid robot, and now the company was going to use his technology to build their humanoid robots, for their own development. That means all these things benefited both Jenny and the company. Jenny got a chance to talk to her husband George for so long, and company got a technology for making humanoid robots. George was very sad to hear the truth that his is just a simulation, and now he is about to expire. This mind-boggling story ends here. If you like this video, please subscribe this channel.